Good morning, everybody. Nice to be here with you once again at Sangha Live's Daily Meditations. My name is Miles Kessler, and I'm leading this week of daily practice sessions on the theme of the Four Noble Practices: letting come, letting go, letting be, and letting grow. The Buddha's Four Noble Practices, or how to practice with the Four Noble Truths. Before I start, I just have a couple of announcements. So today I will give a little bit of a talk. We're going to do a practice session, a meditation session for about 20 minutes. And instead of doing the Q&A today, I'll be offering a hot seat interview. And I'm going to do it today, Tuesday, and then Wednesday, tomorrow I'll do Q&A. Thursday I'll do one more hot seat. Friday I'll do Q&A. If anybody wants to come up on stage and be in the hot seat and just share about your practice and receive some guidance on your practice, then you're very welcome. I'll take the first person who puts their name down after the session, and if it gets to be too much of a rush, then we'll figure something out. But just remember that. Second thing is, sometimes questions come up in the practice that don't get there's no time and space to address it here. If you ever have a question or comment about what I'm offering this week, please go to Sangha Live's community portal. There's a questions area. Just write question for Miles, put it down there. Comment for Miles, or something came up for me. Whatever you want to write, put it down there, and I will do my best to respond. I have a little bit of time, not a lot. 2 small kids, 2 businesses, but I'll do my best to answer your questions. Okay. All right. That being said, let's begin. So yesterday we did an overview of the Four Noble Practices. And today we're going to look at the first noble practice of letting come. And just remember, the Four Noble Practices are the practice, our practice relationship with the Four Noble Truths. The very first teaching, Dhammacakka, the first turning of the wheel of the Dhamma. When the Buddha was enlightened, he went and he taught. The first thing he taught to the first people he taught, yogis he taught, was the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. This is the beginning, the middle, and the end of all of our practice. And in addition to the Four Noble Truths, dukkha secca, samudaya secca, magga secca, nirodha secca, and magga secca, the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause, the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path. In relationship to these Four Noble Truths, he also offered 4 practices, 4 noble practices, practices that are high level. And as long as you are not noble, as long as you and I are not noble in a spiritual sense, not in a worldly sense, like we're above other people, but a noble person in the Dhamma means a person who has awakened to some level of enlightenment, that they have reached at least the first path. Perhaps they've reached the second path, the third path, or even the fourth path of awakening, the Sotapanna, stream entry, a Sotapanna, a Anagami, a Sakadagami, a once returner, an Anagami, a non-returner, or an Arahanta, a fully realized being. These 4 stages of awakening are called noble awakenings. And these are, when this awakens, you're considered to be a noble person, only in a spiritual sense. And these 4 noble truths are how our view gets transformed from that awakening. So these, in one way, we could say they are noble perspectives, not social hierarchy nobility. It's not what it means. It means right view, which is rare in the world of human beings. Or usually, instead of seeing things as they are, we see things as we project or as we imagine. So these practices help us along that path, that eightfold noble path, to have these noble realization. And in that sense, these are noble practices, high level practices. The path that we are walking on is a high level path, not an ordinary path. I can walk along an ordinary path and at the end of that, even master an ordinary path. But at the end of that path of mastery, I'll surely have developed many good skills. But who I was at the beginning and who I am at the end is the same person. That's why it's an ordinary path. It does not demand that I change. A high level path demands that we step up to meet the challenges of that path. And each challenge is a process of transformation. Each step on the path is triggered or activated with awareness, with mindfulness. And each step on the path requires us to open up to more. And the Four Noble Truth basically describes that path. The Four Noble Practices are these steps that we take. The first Noble Truth is dukkha secca, the truth of suffering. It simply means suffering exists, unsatisfactory exists. It is a fact of life. We're born in a human body with an unawakened mind. We're going to suffer. Suffering is going to come. It's going to go. Unsatisfactoriness is going to come. It's going to stay for a while, and it's going to go. There's going to be wonderful periods where there's no suffering, where there's no unsatisfactoriness. But then it's just a matter of time before what was sweet and wonderful slips away, and that's not satisfying. Or what is not so pleasant and not so wonderful starts to come into our experience. That's certainly not satisfying. That is the truth of dukkha. There is no escape. Actually, there is one escape. I'm sorry. The escape is at the end of this path. This path that we're practicing is the so-called floor plan of the prison. And there's a map, and we're going to work through that map. That's the fact. The first noble truth is the truth of suffering. The first noble practice is the practice of acceptance. The noble practice of acceptance. That's what we're going to look at today. The four practices is practice of acceptance, the practice of relinquishment, the practice of realization, and the practice of development. I kind of bring them in short form: letting come, letting go, letting be, and letting grow. Today, we're going to look at what does it mean to let experience come without trying to control it, without trying to avoid it, without trying to deny it, without trying to manipulate it, without trying to push it onto somebody else. What is the noble practice of acceptance? So, since you are a Dharma practitioner, I'm sure you have a good sense of a certain sense of what it means to practice acceptance. Any meditator, that's kind of what we're doing. And the beautiful thing about acceptance is the more we practice acceptance, the more we develop tolerance for our experience. The more we practice acceptance in our relationships, the more we develop tolerance for others. The more we practice acceptance in the world, the more we develop tolerance in the world. The more that we practice acceptance, the more that we develop resiliency. In fact, resiliency, or what my teacher Pandita used to call spiritual resiliency, is simply that. It's the practice of developing acceptance. Now, that's not to say that we cannot put boundaries. When something is not healthy for our life or for others, and we have the power or the wherewithal to boundary that, then that's actually a good practice. In fact, spiritual resiliency has two sides of one coin. Happy birthday. Spiritual resiliency has there's two sides to one coin. The first side is withstanding power, that I can withstand. It's a power to withstand whatever experience is coming my way. That takes a lot. And in some days we can't do that. It's just too much. And that's the other side of the coin. It's called repelling power. the power to put up a boundary for something that is too much. So as we're talking about spiritual resiliency, as we're talking about the noble practice of acceptance today, as we're speaking about the practice of letting come, remember, this is a practice of withstanding our experience. If it's too much, healthy self-care is needed. Boundary your experience. The practice of letting come is not only letting everything come. We can also boundary, but it's a conscious boundarying rather than a reactive boundarying. So that's kind of the caveat today. And ultimately speaking, spirit is always already in total, complete, absolute acceptance. Make sense? Spirit absolute is always already in total, complete tolerance. Spiritual experience or spiritual absolute spirituality, spirit absolute is always already in total, complete letting things come. There's nothing, there's no sense of self to want to change experience. It's letting things come. This is necessary. This practice is necessary. Remember, the practice of letting come or the practice of acceptance is in relationship to that first noble truth. And the first noble truth is the truth of dukkha, dukkha secca, the truth of unsatisfactoriness. It comes, it stays, and it goes. That's a truth. And it is always cycling through our life. Excuse me. The practice of letting come is to help us, in a way, reverse our counterintuitive relationship to dukkha. So our relationship to dukkha is to really just imagine dukkha's coming, some unsatisfactory experience is coming. Oh, here it comes. It's over here and it's coming towards me. Just instinctively, intuitively, we want to do this. That's our intuitive response to dukkha, to unpleasant experience coming to us. It can be in me, can be in my body, it can be in my mind, a thought. It can be in my relationships, it can be out there in the world. But the fundamental kind of emotional relationship to that is like, we just don't want to accept it. To let that dukkha come is counterintuitive for the self. Does that make sense? This is the whole practice today. To forget that we can boundary if we need to boundary, we can accept if we need to accept. Okay, forget that we always have that ability. Fundamentally, unpleasant experience, an unsatisfying experience, dukkha in one of its manifestations or another, as it enters our experience, fundamentally our emotional relationship to it is to retract, contract, avoid, control. Thank you, Kevin. Control, deflect, or whatever we do. God bless us all. So it's important. This first noble practice is to help us see that little contraction that we have when dukkha is arising in our experience. And in fact, it's the same thing in our practice as it is in, let's say, something like therapy. And, when we're doing therapy, when we're with a good therapist, a good method, the therapist is just really there as a mirror for us to help us understand our experience. And they constantly reflect us back to, gently, skillfully, compassionately reflect us back to that thing that we don't want to see, that we have this kind of internal, like, no, that experience was a long time ago. I don't want to deal with it. I'd rather deal with them and all the problems that they're causing in my life. Maybe they are causing problems in my life, but there's something I'm avoiding. And a therapist will say, well, that's very interesting. How does it make you feel? Well, that in a way, gently holding my hand helps me to say, oh, how does it make me feel? Now I'm letting it come. I'm letting those feelings come. And can you say more about those feelings? Oh, yeah, and it's this and this. Oh, yeah, and I see that underneath all of that, there was this. I am able to let it come. I'm able to develop tolerance for my internal experience, for unpleasant internal experiences, with the help of an external friend, in this case, the therapist. Just as therapy, same in the Dhamma practice, same in our meditation practice. Meditation practice and therapy practice are slightly different practices. They are not the same. We're doing different work there, but mindfulness is the same. The practice of letting come is the same. In our meditation practice, we might not have the therapist holding our hand, so to speak, but we have our teachers, or we have inspiring talks, or we have beautiful, spiritually inspired poetry, or we have the Dhamma. We have the Buddha, all the books from the Buddha, and we have these practices that help us to not habitually turn away from dukkha, but to stop and allow it to come into our lives. There are 3 areas where we can practice letting come. And after today's session, when you go out into your daily life, when you're released out into the wild, you'll practice it. If you remember, you reflect on this, you'll have opportunities to practice it all day long, tomorrow, the rest of your life, in fact. First place that we want to learn to practice, and these are the 3 primary perspectives, is in the world. What is it about the world? Again, knowing I can boundary if I need to boundary, that I can open boundaries if I need to open boundaries. What is it out there in the world? The news of the world, the relationships of the world, what's happening on the other side of the world, what's happening across in another country, what's happening in my own neighborhood. What is it about the world that I'm not accepting? What is it about the world that I'm pulling back from? And how can I allow that to come? Letting come does not mean that you can't act. Of course you can act. Hopefully you will act skillfully based on Dhamma understanding. Letting come does not mean that you cannot speak. Of course you can speak, and hopefully you will speak righteously based on Dhamma understanding. Yeah. But what is it about the world that we're in contraction with? Like an unhealthy kind of cortisol-infused emotional stance against the world. And what would it take for me to see that and let it come? That's the first place, in the world. The second place that we practice letting come is in our personal relationships. The world is third person. Personal relationships is second person, this kind of plural place where we relate with other people. Reflect on this. What is it about your relationships, without getting too deep into the mud or the joy? But what is it about your relationships where you're having a hard time to let things come about the other person? Oh my God. Yeah. What is it? Oh, I just can't tolerate that in the other person, or I just can't accept that in the other person. Really, why? Again, we can boundary, we can act, and we can speak, and we can sit down and try to figure things out, and we can leave. All that's fine. All that's possible. But what is it in terms of this first noble practice of letting come? What am I not letting come? And what does it take for me just to stop, center, ground, feel my experience, feel the dukkha, experience the dukkha, take a breath, and choose to take on a noble practice, this high-level practice of just letting it come into my experience. Oh my God. Of course, if it's too overwhelming, then boundary it. That's fine. That could be the right thing to do. But if we're doing that habitually, it's there's not much utility in that. So the first place that we practice letting come is in the world. The second place that we practice letting come is in our relationships. The third place that we practice letting come is in ourselves, in our own personal experience. And that's what we're doing today with meditation. We're letting things come into our meditation practice. The way that we resist experience in meditation practice, in mindfulness meditation practice, one way to look at the way that we resist letting experience come or accepting experience is through the progress of the stages of practice. In the early stages of practice, there's a lot of mental hindrances, and we struggle so much. It's like we have a battle with ourselves in our own mind, and we're struggling with desires, and we're struggling with aversions, We're struggling with sleepiness or laziness of the mind. We're struggling with restlessness of the mind. We're struggling with doubts. And then we judge all that stuff and we struggle with all that stuff. That is normal. If those things are happening in your practice, you are right on track. You're doing great. The practice is not to make those things go away. The practice is not to reduce them. The practice is not to bypass them. The practice is to allow them, to accept them, let them come. Why? Because it's dukkha, because it is unsatisfactory. Now, these are the early stages of the practice. Of course, mental challenges are all the way up into the deep, even in the deep end of the pool, we'll have mental challenges, but particularly so in the early stages of the practice. And I'm going to skip a lot of stages here, but as your practice matures, even in the early stages, there's another point. There's a lot of physical stiffness in the early stages of the practice. There's a lot of tightness of breath in the early stages of the practice. And I mentioned something about this yesterday, but like working with yogis in interviews, it just takes a few moments to realize that when these things arise, they're not letting it come. They do some breathing exercises to regulate. Breathing exercises to regulate your breath is a very healthy thing to do. It is good. But if your practice is unfolding and tension is arising, if your practice is unfolding and restricted breathing is arising, if your practice is unfolding and the breathing is unpleasant, as it should be at certain points on the path, practice letting come. That is dukkha manifesting in your practice. The wrong view is trying to change that into some kind of shanti shanti, peaceful post-yoga, what's that one called? Shivasana, the lying down pose where, it just feels so great after yoga to just lie down. If that arises in meditation, that's wonderful, but that's more kind of in the deep end of the pool. Early stages, you're not going to get a lot of that. So let that come. Stiffness in the body, restriction of breath, let it come. With the caveat that if you need to self-care, then do your breathing exercise, then regulate and rebalance, and then go back in. As you advance in the practice and you get into the kind of the more advanced stages of the practice, you'll hit the dukkha stages. And the dukkha stages are really challenging stages in the practice. I'm not going to go into them all here, but a lot of existential fear comes up in those stages as an advanced practice, as insight, not as delusion, but as insight. Deeper dissatisfaction arises, misery can arise as insight, and dispassion can arise as insight. These are when you kind of hit the dark night of the soul, belly of the whale stages, and our practice there is to let come, let come, let come. Acceptance, acceptance, acceptance. The only way out is through. And then even in the later stages, kind of the upper reaches or the deep end of the pool, there's a stage called reobservation. And in reobservation, our practice kind of reviews all of the stuff that we had along the path, the hundreds of thousands of different little experiences that we can have. And it's kind of crazy. And it can be really frustrating stage of practice. And it's an advanced stage of practice. The practice there, even advanced stages, is to practice letting come. Because only through that, when it matures to the point of hitting the stage of equanimity, sankarupekanyana, equanimity towards all formations, then will you begin to understand Spirit Absolute that is always resilient, in equanimity towards all formations as an advanced stage of practice. Then you will start to understand Spirit Absolute as always already tolerant, always already balanced, always already equanimous, always already letting experience come, always already in a profound state of acceptance. There's no practice at that point. It is a manifestation of an awakened consciousness. And it's beautiful. It's the sweetest of all the stages. It's the sweetest of all the experience. Well, no, there's a sweeter experience. Nibbana is the sweetest of all the experiences, but Sankarupekanyana, the stage from which the mind can cross the stream, is the sweetest of all the stages. To get there, there's quite a journey that we have to go through. And the noble practice of letting come will serve us all along the way. Okay? Let's meditate. I'll give a short guidance and then we'll sit for 20 minutes. Take a moment and center yourself in the body. Take a moment and center yourself in the mind. And let's center ourselves today with this centering phrase. I'll say it and I invite you to repeat it in your mind after I say it. The centering phrase is, whatever arises in the course of my practice is the path. Whatever arises in the course of my practice is my path. Eyes closed. Take a moment and check in with the body. Being mindful of what's arising in the body. And notice if there's any unpleasant, unsatisfying physical experience that the mind is not really tolerating. And just take a breath. Reflect if you're allowing, accepting, and letting experience come. And shifting your mindfulness to the mind, noticing the quality of the mind. Noticing if the mind is more on the pleasant side. Noticing if the mind is more on the neutral side. Or noticing if the mind is more on the unpleasant side. And noticing if the mind is in an open state of acceptance, letting experience come. And noticing if the mind has any subtle contraction, not allowing experience to come, not accepting experience. And should that be the case, ask yourself, can I let this come? Can I accept my unaccepting mind? Can I accept my contracted mind? And noticing the moment you reflect like that, the mind can differentiate from the identity and observe the experience in the mind. And gently directing your attention to the breath. If you have a different meditation practice, you can kind of anchor in that now. I'm going to speak about the breath, but really you can do whatever practice is your daily practice. And as you observe the breath, notice the precise physical sensations on the movement of the in-breath as you breathe in. Notice the precise physical sensations on the movement of the out-breath as you breathe out. Notice the subtle qualities and characteristics as you breathe. Knowing if the breath is smooth or rough. Knowing if the breath is loose or tight. Knowing if the breath is long or medium or short. Noticing the breath is fast, medium, or slow. Whatever the case may be, know the breath as it is, and with no intention to change it, observe the characteristics and observe what happens. Should any unpleasant, unsatisfactory experience arise in the breath, Remember the noble practice of letting come. Let that experience enter into your experience. Being mindful of each breath and each moment by moment, breath by breath. And bringing your mindfulness back to the body, feel the body, and practice letting experience come to the body. Bringing your mindfulness to your heart and feel the heart, and practice letting experience come into the heart space. And bring your mindfulness to the mind, knowing your mental state, and practicing acceptance of the current mental state. And feeling the space on the inside. As you slowly come out of the meditation, opening your eyes and feeling the space on the outside. Okay, before we go into the hot seat interview, I do want to mention that remind everybody that Sangha Live is hosting these meetings for free, and that it's through the donations of our community members that we're able to do this, or Sangha Live is able to do this. And as I said yesterday, and I'll probably say tomorrow too, they're doing an amazing job. You know, I'm front stage with you guys, but I see what's going on backstage, and they're really working hard and doing an amazing job to support this platform so we can all gather here and simply practice the Dhamma. And as the saying goes back in Burma, we support the Dhamma supports us. The Dhamma supports us, we support the Dhamma. Of course, the highest form of dana, the highest form of generosity is whatever awakened consciousness you have to share that with others. That is the highest form of dana, the spiritual perfection of generosity. But as that spirit manifests down into material, it does take funding to run this program. So I put a link for anybody who would like to offer. So as I mentioned, today I'm going to do a hot seat interview. So if you're interested in doing a hot seat, please raise your hand. I've got to get my notes. And I did, as I said before, I would prefer to have somebody new that hasn't done an interview with me before. Doesn't matter if you have a beginner's practice, an intermediate practice, or an advanced practice. If you do come on stage, please come on stage with an open mind and willingness to receive guidance. There's a button at the bottom of the screen here to raise the hand. And if you want to do it, but you're afraid, come join me. And we'll give that another moment. And then if somebody's new doesn't want to come on, I'm looking for, oh, Natalie wants to come in. Okay, Natalie, hang on a second. How do I bring you in? Natalie, can you raise your hand? by pushing the button down here. Pushing the hand button down here. See, I just raised my hand. If the button, you might be on your phone, I don't know, but there should be a button to raise your hand. I don't know how to bring people on screen other way. Let me see if I can find you here. Natalie. There you are. Okay. Now I can bring you on screen. Okay. All right. You should be able to join me now. Can you say something, Natalie? You're muted and your screen is turned off. I need to see your face if you're going to do this.
Oh.
Hi, I can hear you, but I don't see your face. There you are. Hi, Natalie.
Hi.
Thanks for joining me here.
Can you hear me, Miles?
Everything's great. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate your questions and stuff. Here's how we do this interview. You might have seen me do it before, but I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about your practice. And then what I'm trying to get to understand is what's happening phenomenologically. So I might gently redirect you towards explaining your phenomenological experience. Okay. If I do that, don't misunderstand it. I'm not invalidating what you're saying. I'm just trying to get a little bit more to the essence where we can do, where we can actually do a bit more of an effective process here. Does that sound okay?
Mm.
Okay, good. And you're practicing mindfulness meditation?
Yes.
And what's your primary object?
The breath in meditation would be the breath in the belly.
Awesome. Okay. So let's talk about that. When you sit down, close your eyes, maybe from today's meditation, or generally speaking, either way is fine. What are you noticing in the precise sensations, qualities, and or characteristics of the in-breath, just the in-breath? You can even check in now if you want.
There's a what you call it, expansion on the inhale.
Okay, what else?
I can't think. Pressure. That's it.
Perfect.
That's the word.
Okay. Anything else?
Expansion, pressure, sort of swelling.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I've got, Miles, for now.
Okay, so let me help you. Would you say the breath is on the longer side, the shorter side, or average, whatever that means?
It really depends at what stage of
That's
the
great.
meditation. So typically at the beginning, it's on the shorter side. I was going to refer to the out breath, but you haven't asked me about that yet. But yeah, so at the beginning, typically on the short side.
Mm-hmm. And then it gets longer.
And I would say a slight doing of it. Does
like
that make sense?
Effortfulness?
Like the self or the I am doing the in-breath.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Do you and how is that for you? Do you struggle with that, or is it something you can allow to happen?
I would say I can allow.
Okay, so you notice there's a certain effortfulness, the sense of self is doing the breath.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. And what are the qualities and characteristics of that, what I'm calling effortfulness? What are those?
Gosh. Sorry, I can't. I'm not sure, Miles.
Well, it
qualities
could be
and characteristics of effort.
Well, you said there's a slight doing, right?
Yes. Well, there's a noticing that there's I don't know. I suppose mindfulness or the observer is noticing that there's how do I know that there's a doing rather than an allowing and a following, if
That's
that
great.
makes sense.
It
A
makes
kind
total.
of a
Yeah. And is that doing physical or is it mental?
I think it might be mental.
Check in. I'm not sure if it'll be there now, but check in.
So just then there was doing the in breath. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't. There was making it, um, and
And
that one was a natural one. I
okay, that's fine. Yeah. And is the
yeah
making, not to get stuck on this point because it's just a small point,
yeah
but just to help you
yeah.
understand, was the making a physical thing or was it a mental thing? Were you mentally making it happen or was it physically making it happen?
Um, I think there's a mental intention, and then it happens physically.
Fantastic. Great. Okay. And how does the in breath come to an end? How does it, the way a car would stop at a stop sign, how does the
Yeah.
breath, does it suddenly stop? Does it gradually stop? Does it not
No.
stop at all?
No. It's like I don't know if it was you, Miles, but it's a sort of so it comes up and then naturally does that.
Yeah.
It's like sort of gravity, sort of
Yeah.
reaches a certain point
Mhm.
and then drops.
Great. And when it drops, does it
Yeah.
stop suddenly or does it stop like gradually or does it just sort of disappear?
Um, no. Then it becomes the out breath.
Okay.
So there's following the in breath. There's a sort of a point, and then attention is following the out breath.
Great. So, quick question about that. Before we talk
Yeah.
about the out breath, before the out breath, is there a pause or is it just goes directly into the out breath? Maybe you can take a moment to check that right now. No rush.
So just in that breath cycle, there was just a slight pause
Aha.
before
Okay.
it dropped.
Fantastic. And what is the
Yeah.
quality of that pause?
Um, Sorry, Miles, I'm not sure. I
Take a moment and check. I'm not sure is a perfectly valid answer, but
yeah.
you looked a little bit more and then we saw a little bit of a pause. Now see if you can just see if there's any quality to that pause or not.
Um, all I'd say is maybe a slight feeling of pressure. It's very small.
Hmm. Yeah, makes total
Or
sense. Is that pressure physical or mental?
physical.
Okay, good. So it's not pressure from me asking the questions.
No,
It's
no. Although, Miles, I did notice a bit of self-consciousness
there you
arising,
go.
and then
Fantastic.
yeah.
And then quick question, is the self-consciousness physical or mental?
Oh, oh. Um, there we go. It's like an awareness of self. I just had it then when you asked that question. Um, I think it's physical. There's a sudden awareness of me, of self.
Great.
Perhaps a slight hardening of the body. So I think it's
Okay.
physical.
Okay. But you did say it was self-conscious, and conscious at least implies that it's in our
Ah, okay. Maybe the wrong choice of word.
well, no,
Perhaps self-aware. Oh,
well,
perhaps
what I'm saying,
self-awareness,
yeah, it can be
like
both.
a me and a you.
Right. And what I'm saying, it shouldn't be one or the other. It can totally be both. I'm
Ah,
just
ah.
seeing from hearing your words, I'm wondering if it was a mental thing and then that subtle hardening of the body was there.
Yeah, it could have been both, but it's very quick.
Mhm. Okay, great. Now, there's a reason I'm asking all these questions, which I'll describe and explain in just a moment. But
Okay.
if you could just, because we're getting close to the end of time, if you could just give me a general, with as much detail as possible of the out breath, all the way to the end of the out breath.
Um, it's. pleasant, or I name it this, as pleasant, a softness, a sort of a collapsing,
Mm-hmm.
emptying.
Mm-hmm.
It changes during the course of
Mm-hmm.
meditation.
How?
Initially short, and then as there's an allowing of the as there's a following the out breath, the in breath comes in naturally, sort of flows into the out breath.
Mm-hmm. And then how does the out breath come to an end?
Uh,
How does it
uh,
stop?
it doesn't. What does it do?
Check it
It
out.
like um,
Take your time.
it's like sort of emptying, and then there's just a slight pressure at the end in the belly, and then the in breath comes
Nice.
in.
Pause or no pause?
Oh,
Check it out.
tiny pause,
What's
tiny
the
pause.
what's the quality of the pause? Other than tiny, tiny is a quality. But is there another quality to the pause?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay, so next question. This will be the last question.
Okay.
From that tiny pause, how does the in breath begin?
What comes up for me,
Hmm.
Miles, is that I want to say it doesn't begin. Like in you've got I can see the calligraphy behind you. What does it mood you? The circle.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, if I have to express it, it's kind of like that.
Okay, but there is a
Um,
pause, tiny,
yes,
and then there's,
tiny.
then there's a start.
Yeah,
Okay.
like
Great.
the in breath I showed you sort of that. That's much more obvious. Whereas sort of the out breath, it's like a little boop, and then
Yeah, that's clear. Very clear. That's awesome. Okay, so I got to say a few things here. First, we've hit time. We're going to go over a few more minutes just so I can explain what we did and maybe give a few pointers to Natalie. If you have to leave, thank you so much for joining. If you can stay for maybe 4 more minutes, then please do. Okay, so Natalie, a quick question. You said the out breath was pleasant. Was that physical or mental, or both?
well, there was the physical sensation, but there was the the noticing or the awareness or opinion would have been mental,
Okay, great. And I also said soft. Was that physical or mental?
physical.
Great. Okay. And this circle that you were talking about,
Yeah,
which was an explanation of a feeling you had. Was
yeah.
that feeling physical or mental?
Um, the using the circle describe was mental, but the feeling is physical.
Great, very good. And the awareness, the witness, as you said, would be mental.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so thank you very much. So let me just say a few things. Now, generally speaking, my leading questions, there's no wrong answers, but they're just there to help you look closer. And as you know, you may have noticed, as you looked closer, your description became much more detailed. There was way more texture to your experience. At the beginning, you said on the in breath there was expansion and pressure, and then you said swelling and expansion again, and then pressure again. There wasn't a whole lot, even though
Mm,
that's a lot. Don't misunderstand me. But then as I,
mm.
I asked some more leading questions, you had quite an in depth explanation of what's going on.
Did
Yeah.
I? Oh,
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, you said it was long. It's effort. There was an effortfulness. There was a selfing. It ended in a specific way. You gradually went out the breath, and there was pressure. Then you noticed the self. We got into quite a description of what your experience was. The point I'm making is that's how we kind of want to meditate. to be able to see that level of detail. We can't always do it, but there's always more we can see. So that's what, and it's so easy in our meditation practice to just kind of float on the experience and not go into the details. But don't get the wrong idea. You don't have to look closer. You just look, and what happens is the details will come to your mind with patience. Now, the way I ask the questions in the first stage of insight knowledge, which I'm not saying you're in that first stage, but it's a clear differentiation between physical and mental. That the mind quite intuitively begins to, the insight is that the mind starts to understand the differentiation between what's physical and what's mental, and then how they're connected. And as that grows, it will lead to the second stage of insight knowledge, that we start to understand connections. That we see, for example, as I am answering the question, suddenly of self-consciousness came up. And as I observed that, I noticed a hardness in the body. That's describing the connections of our experience. That's the second insight. So it's very important for you in your foundational practice. Whenever you start to intuitively notice the distinction between mind and body, recognize that. Reflect on that for a moment. That's namarupa. That's mind and body. Whenever you start to see a connection between experiences, notice that, this is a cause and effect happening here. The second stage of insight knowledge is cause and effect. The more you recognize that, the more your foundation will be stable. For the third stage of insight to knowledge to arise, that's the beginning of process-oriented consciousness. That's when we really start to see the Dhamma. And what that means is that we are able to see the beginning, the middle, and the end of experience. So when I first asked you about the breath, how does it end? You said, no, it doesn't end. It just kind of, it's like an, what is that thing? An infinity sign or whatever. It just continues over. But then as I asked you to take a moment and observe, you said, oh, wait a second. There's a teeny tiny pause there. So the in-breath has a life and it has an end. Now, the first two stages, we can't see that. As that third stage of insight is arising, we begin to see that. The out-breath has a life and it has an end. It repeats. And of course, energetically, we might have that feeling that it's going in a circle, which is completely fine. But you'll start to notice the beginning, the middle, and the end of experience. And that's kind of, I think, your leading edge area. I mean, you perhaps even more. But when that happens, we drop into process-oriented consciousness. And that means that we're able to stay with the process all the way through. That we see an experience, and then we'll see how that experience starts to transform and change. Sometimes you might feel energy over here or something, and the energy will, just an example, it might travel like up the head, up the body and over the head. And you're just able to kind of watch it travel. Or you'll see a light in the eye or some image in the eye, and it'll start to move. That's kind of that stage of process-oriented consciousness where it's really the pure observer. This is a significant stage because what happens at this stage is what was solid before, for example, the breath. When we stay with that enough and it matures, the solid breath begins to break into parts. So you might start to notice fluctuations in the breath since you're meditating on the breath. You might start to notice the breath is moving in waves. You might start to notice weird kind of image or things happening in the breath. The body might start to expand and distort. You might notice the breath is even chopping into pieces, like sections, section 1, section 2, section 3, whatever. So this is kind of, I think, at least according to what we spoke about today, kind of leading edge stuff for you. What will help that to happen, even in your daily practice, is sit down with the intention to allow detail to come. Don't try to have detail, just allow details to come. Recognize the distinction between physical and mental, should it arise, and it will. It's intuitive at this point. Recognize cause and effect when you start to say, oh, this thought, self-conscious thought, caused a hardness in the body, for example. Recognize that. That's foundational insight, especially for you. And then when you can see a whole process happening, see if you can follow the process right to the end. See if there's a pause between the next breath and see the very beginning of the next breath. And Bob's your uncle. Yeah. There's a lot more, but that's kind of, I think that's good enough for today.
Great. Yeah? Thank you, Miles.
And Natalie, thank you for joining me on screen. And
I don't know how to get myself off, but
well, maybe I can do that. I'll try. Yeah, I can do it. Okay. We'll see you soon. And for everybody else, I want to thank you for joining today. Just a few reminders. Tomorrow I'll be doing a Q&A at the end of the session. On Thursday, again, I'll do a hot seat. So if anybody wants to join in, you're invited to join me. Friday, I'll do a Q&A. Tomorrow, Tuesday, Wednesday, today's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Tomorrow will be, we'll look at the noble practice of letting go. Thursday, we'll look at the noble practice of letting be. And Friday, we'll look at the noble practice of letting grow. Today was letting come, acceptance, relinquishment, realization, development. These are the 4 noble practices of the Buddha. And should you have any questions coming up, put them in the Sangha Live portal, and I will do my best to answer them. And with that, I want to wish you all a great day of practice, a great week of practice. May your practice continue to unfold, and may you be able to remember and allow and accept the practice of letting come. And may that lead you forward, forever and always forward on your path. Thank you, everybody.